September 9th, 2025. At exactly 7:23 p.m., a 40-year-old Su-24M bomber is performing its final checks for one of its most challenging missions. While the ground crew performs checks with hydraulic jacks, two massive Storm Shadow missiles, each weighing 1,300 kilograms, are locked onto the plane's two wings. Inside them are broach tandem warheads, each weighing 450 kilograms, designed to collapse shelters and reinforced concrete headquarters from within. As the jet moves toward the runway with this deadly 2,600 kilogram payload, the crew sees green on the final lock test and withdraws with a silent nod. The target is approximately 850 kilometers away from the 7th Tactical Aviation Brigade base in Khmelnytsky Oblast. For the Su-24 pilot, this mission would be the most dangerous flight of his career. The 250-kilometer range of the Storm Shadow missiles looked like an insurance policy on paper, but in reality, it was a death trap. Because the pilot had to launch these warheads, loaded with 450 kilograms of explosives, from a distance of about 15 kilometers to hit the target. And that meant diving into an area heavily protected by Russian air defenses and radars. Nevertheless, the Su-24 shot off the runway like an arrow for a flight of about 35 minutes. A single mistake in the operation would result in a catastrophic defeat for Ukrainian forces. Because at that moment, a huge armored mechanized group from the Russian 41st Army and 20th Corps was preparing for a major offensive in Pokrovsk. Ukrainian pressure along the Pokrovsk-Dobrobila line had forced a large pocket, putting two Russian regiments in the area under the threat of complete encirclement. The call for support had reached the 41st Army and 20th Division. Behind the front lines, dozens of T-90 tanks, BMP-3 armored combat vehicles, and self-propelled howitzers were gathering for a counterattack toward Pokrovsk, while fuel and ammunition convoys waited their turn to move. However, this attack line would collapse before a single tank could turn its tracks, because the Russian High Command had made one of the most unforgivable mistakes in modern warfare. The day before, Ukraine's Hortitsia M land-based electronic warfare and signals intelligence system had detected an abnormal data traffic intensity on specific frequencies used by senior Russian commanders. Russian officers had acted within their comfort zones, relying on their routines. No one knew that these conversations and data streams had already been filtered and cataloged. The signals intersected at 2 points: the Topaz radio electronic factory in the north of the city and the massive Donetsk metallurgical plant in the center. Shark reconnaissance drones, immediately directed to the area, tracked this trail from an altitude of 15,000 feet with powerful optical zoom cameras. The Shark reconnaissance drone's hours-long, extended observation provided visual confirmation of the vehicle rotation and escort numbers of high-ranking officers entering and leaving the facilities. Visual confirmation was provided by Shark drones that these two industrial facilities were the headquarters of the 41st Army and 20th Division. Ukrainian forces had also detected the massive mechanized tank convoy's preparations for an attack in this way. However, the way to stop the massive Russian tank convoy was neither to bomb the convoy nor to collide with it on the front line. Because Ukrainian troops had no time for counter-defense and ambush either, the plan was much bolder and much smarter: to eliminate the source of the flood, namely the two brains controlling it, simultaneously and with a single precision strike. Therefore, the only chance was a successful shot from the Su-24. Donetsk and its surroundings were protected by a network of Russia's most advanced, multi-layered air defense systems, such as the S-300 and S-400. Storm Shadow missiles flew just below the speed of sound, at a speed of Mach 0.8 to 0.95. Launching from maximum range, a safe distance, meant giving Russian radars and fighter jets a golden window of approximately 15 minutes to detect, track, and destroy these slow and stable targets. This meant the operation would fail before it even began. The solution lay on that fine line between madness and heroism, reducing the missile's airborne time to under 1 minute. He would launch the missiles about 15 kilometers from the target and somehow get out of there alive. Alone, without escorts. His only protection would be his aircraft's mastery of low altitude, the electronic countermeasure ECM capabilities gained through NATO integration, and the deadly symphony that would soon erupt in the skies over Donetsk. The Su-24 shot off the runway like an arrow and disappeared into the darkness of the night with its two 1,300-kilogram deadly payloads. Seconds after takeoff, the pilot pushed the stick forward, forcing the aircraft down toward the ground. At just 50 to 60 meters altitude, it glided between the treetops, almost within reach of the cockpit's side window and power lines, exploiting the terrain's blind spots. This was what the Su-24 did best. Its modern terrain-following radar, integrated into its aging fuselage, combined with digital maps, rendered it nearly invisible to Russian radar, turning it into a ghost. However, the pilot's success depended entirely on the perfect coordination of an entire electronic warfare network. Dozens of drones and the command center in Kiev. Support coordination with the drones to be used for deception and decoying was critical to the operation's success. Various drones had taken off from different secret bases in Ukraine, like pieces of a large orchestra. At the same time, Ukraine's newly developed 3 jet-powered Peklo cruise missiles were also launched. They were not decoys. They were the shock troops that would appear on the scene seconds before the main strike. Their targets were the same as those of the Storm Shadows. 2 were the headquarters of the 41st Army, and 1 was the headquarters of the 20th Division. Their mission was to cause panic and chaos by inflicting initial damage, forcing personnel at command centers into shelters, and most importantly, drawing the Russians' full attention to themselves, buying the Su-24 pilot those invaluable seconds. The Peklo drone missiles were accompanied by a swarm consisting of 15 UJ-26 Beaver and RAM-2X kamikaze drones flying at medium altitude. The mission of this kamikaze swarm was simple: to occupy the radar consoles of the Pantsir and Tor batteries, fill them with false targets, and force the operators to make wrong decisions. 7 of the UJ-26 Beavers in this swarm had a much more specific task. They would target the power distribution cabinets and backup UPS rooms of the radar control centers in the area. The plan was not to create a total blackout, but rather a sectoral blind spot, creating interruptions in the data flow that would last only seconds, but would be of vital importance. This entire complex operation was being managed in real time from an underground command center in Kiev via an encrypted satellite link. On the giant screen, icons representing the Su-24s, kamikaze drones, and Peklos advanced amid threatening red circles indicating Russian radar ranges. The kamikaze packages revealed themselves with unusual altitude profiles and sudden direction changes. Russian operators had to deal with dozens of targets, interference, and false echoes appearing on their radar consoles simultaneously. The first kamikaze link failed to lock on, and a 20-second glitch occurred in the package while the operator tried to change the frequency band. This delay might have seemed like a temporary respite on Russian consoles, but it was actually just part of the chaos. However, 7 UJ-26 Beavers continued to advance toward their targets, infiltrating at low altitude. A few minutes later, 2 major successes were reported over the network. 2 kamikaze drones had reached their targets, striking 2 separate radar stations and a command and control vehicle. A momentary gap in the Russian defense network created a blind spot and communication breakdown lasting just over a minute. This was the moment the Su-24 pilot had been waiting for. He dove his aircraft at full speed through this blind corridor. But the danger was not over. A Russian Beriev A-50A WACS aircraft scanning the area from high altitude instantly detected the heat signature emanating from the Su-24's engines despite this momentary blind spot and relayed the data to the nearest S-400 battery. The heart-stopping shrill sound of the radar lock warning sounded in the pilot's headset. In a split-second reflex, he pulled back on the stick, nearly putting the aircraft into a vertical climb to abruptly reduce speed, and simultaneously slammed the chaff/flare button. The metal particles and magnesium heat cloud erupting from the aircraft's rear successfully deceived the seeker head of the approaching 48N6E missile. The massive missile, heading for the false target, exploded several kilometers away in the sky in a huge fireball. It was a life-and-death dance that lasted seconds. When the pilot escaped the danger and dove back to low altitude, the Peklos were about to reach their targets. The trio of Peklos entered the city from different axes. One was detected and shot down at 8 kilometers by a Tor battery. Another was destroyed at 12 kilometers by a Pantsir. 2 fireballs appeared in the sky. However, the third one bypassed all defenses and struck the main communications tower on the roof of the Topaz factory, where the 41st Army headquarters was located. The explosion of the 50-kilogram warhead shattered the tower like a matchstick. cutting off the headquarters' main communication with the outside world and causing great panic inside. Russian commanders and air defense operators had turned their full attention to this sudden and unexpected attack. Alarm sirens were blaring, and everyone was trying to understand what was happening. This single hit disrupted the disciplined rhythm inside. This was the perfect moment they had been looking for. The chaos, panic, and severed communications were the best camouflage for the Storm Shadow missiles. The pilot had reached the launch point. Live footage from a shark drone waiting overhead confirmed that the targets were active and that high-ranking commanders were in the buildings. The final command from Kiev came in a single word: fire! 2 Storm Shadows smoothly detached from the wings of the aircraft and began their autonomous, deadly journeys. As the missiles glided toward their targets, the pilot made a sharp turn, pushing the aircraft to its limits, and began skimming the treetops again to escape the hell he had created. 35 seconds later, the first Storm Shadow struck the 41st Army bunker beneath the Topaz factory. The missile plunged into the main ventilation shaft, laser-guided by a shark drone. Deep underground, dozens of meters below the surface, it detonated right in the middle of the general and his staff. The immense energy trapped inside the underground shelter found no escape. The pressure wave bounced off the concrete walls and tore everything inside apart: equipment, plans, almost down to their atoms. 43 seconds later, the second Storm Shadow reached the 20th Division headquarters at the metallurgy factory. The broach warhead worked like a flawless symphony. The leading explosive pierced several layers of reinforced concrete on top of the building, creating a perfect hole for the main warhead to pass through. Milliseconds later, the 450-kilogram main warhead slipped through that hole and exploded right in the heart of the building, in the middle of the command center. The massive pressure wave tore through all the floors from the inside out, finding no escape route. The building's steel skeleton resisted for a moment, then, unable to withstand its own weight, collapsed in a huge cloud of fire, smoke, and concrete dust, taking everything inside with it. The Russian side's initial reaction was to conceal the panic and the scale of the disaster. It was reported that both facilities were quickly surrounded by military cordons formed by Spetsnaz and FSB units. All roads leading to the area were cut off. Debris removal work began under projectors throughout the night, under absolute secrecy. Ambulance and fire engine sirens that did not stop throughout the night, heavy machinery working until morning, and streets closed to traffic with military tape revealed the whole truth. The impact of the attack can be described as Russia's command paralysis. The headquarters of the 41st Army and 20th Division were not only places where orders were given, but also centers where intelligence from the entire front line was gathered, analyzed, and artillery, air support, and logistics flows were directed accordingly. When these centers were destroyed, the Army lost its brain. Troops in the field could not contact their superiors. Phones went silent, encrypted networks collapsed, and the Army reverted to a structure where orders were transmitted on paper, extremely slow and inefficient in the middle of the 21st century. Hourly plans stretched into days. In modern warfare, the effectiveness of artillery depends on the shortness of the time between sensor and strike. The headquarters functioned as centers that processed target information from UAVs and forward observers and relayed it to artillery batteries. When this center was destroyed, thousands of Russian field guns on the battlefield were largely left blind and deaf. We witnessed the same situation in these operations. After Ukraine's attacks on 2 Russian command centers, the Kremlin's artillery fire either stopped completely or turned into random harassment fire with low accuracy. The large mechanized offensive that was being prepared required enormous amounts of fuel and ammunition. The centers that managed the flow and timing of this supply were the headquarters that were hit. Without them, the logistics convoys behind the front lines remained in their depots, waiting for orders. Hundreds of tanks and armored vehicles became metal piles, devoid of fuel and ammunition. The destruction of these 2 industrial sites, considered the heart of Donetsk and deemed untouchable, created a shockwave within the Russian army and among its collaborators. Even personnel serving in headquarters behind the front lines no longer felt safe. This led to deep mistrust and paranoia among the command echelons. The surviving Russian command elements began to split into smaller, scattered units and constantly change locations. While this made it more difficult to target them, it permanently reduced their command efficiency and coordination capabilities. Meetings at the Russian army's command center on the Ukrainian front lines became shorter, decisions were delayed, and most importantly, the question of who had targeted them sparked a witch hunt within the institutions. The FSB launched investigations, suspecting a traitor or infiltration within, further undermining the morale and initiative of military personnel. This attack not only stopped a Russian offensive, but also created a golden opportunity for Ukraine to seize the initiative across Donbass. With the Russian front paralyzed and in a state of command vacuum, Ukraine launched its counteroffensive. When the coordination of Russian artillery and air defense broke down, Ukraine's own drones, artillery, and even armored units found much greater freedom of movement on the battlefield. Areas that were previously risky due to Russian counter-battery fire now became hunting grounds for Ukrainian artillery. Russian units, left without command, began to leave gaps in their defensive lines. Ukrainian special forces and small, mobile assault groups infiltrated these gaps, raided Russian rear lines, cut off supply routes, and launched local counterattacks. Advances that would have taken months were now being made in a matter of days thanks to this command vacuum. Ukraine was no longer the side reacting to Russia's next move. It was the side dictating the pace and location of the war. The static trench warfare in Donbass gained the potential to transform into a dynamic maneuver warfare in Ukraine's favor. So this move was not just a story of burning buildings and dead commanders. It marked the dawn of how technology, intelligence, and determination could prevail over brute force. If you want to follow this war not just with numbers, but with strategies, human stories, and deep analysis, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like this video, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Remember, war is won not only on the front lines, but also in knowledge and awareness. Thank you for watching.